In 1984, a major American studio released a horror film in which Santa Claus murders people with an axe. Within 1 week, parent groups were picketing outside theaters in 14 American cities. The studio pulled the film from distribution. The protesters had not seen the film. They had seen the poster. The film grossed more money after the controversy than it had before it. That is the 4th film on tonight's list. Subscribe before we start. 7 slasher films from the 1980s that the decade produced and the mainstream conversation almost entirely missed. Like this video if you recognize even one title. And tell me in the comments which slasher setting you find most disturbing, because tonight's list covers a train, a prom, a hospital, a school, an athletic facility, and a cheerleader camp. And every one of them has a specific reason the setting makes the violence worse.
Who's that?
Oh, that's just Kenny Hampson.
Terror Train 1980, directed by Roger Spottiswoode. A medical school fraternity's New Year's Eve party, a Bordeaux-chartered train becomes the site of a series of murders by a killer who adopts the costume of each victim immediately after killing them. Moving through the masked party crowd with complete invisibility, while a magician's performance provides the evening's entertainment, and Jamie Lee Curtis provides the one person whose specific involvement in a hazing prank 3 years earlier connects her to whatever is happening in the train's rear cars. Astral Films released Terror Train through 20th Century Fox with Jamie Lee Curtis in the lead role. Her casting following Halloween and Prom Night, establishing her as the decade's most commercially bankable scream queen before the term had fully entered the genre's critical vocabulary. Roger Spottiswoode directed with a formal confidence that the production's Canadian tax shelter financing had not guaranteed, using the train's physical constraints to build genuine claustrophobic dread rather than simply staging conventional slasher set pieces within a moving location. David Copperfield appears as the magician. His actual professional performance footage integrated into the narrative with the specific function of providing cover for the killer's movements through the crowd. A formal decision that gave the film's tension sequences a specific theatrical misdirection quality that the genre's more straightforwardly violent competitors rarely attempted. The costume-switching sequence in the film's second act, in which the killer's methodology becomes clear, and the audience realizes that any masked figure in the frame could be either a genuine party guest or the killer, was the formal achievement most cited by genre critics, examining Terror Train's specific contribution to the slasher cycle's broader development of identity confusion as a horror mechanism. Terror Train has been released through Scream Factory in a restoration. Roger Spottiswoode went on to direct mainstream Hollywood productions, including Tomorrow Never Dies. Jamie Lee Curtis has discussed the production warmly in subsequent interviews. David Copperfield's professional involvement in a slasher film has generated periodic discussion in retrospective coverage of both his career and the films.
Date. Getting closer, though.
James is resident.
Kelly.
Prom Night 1980, directed by Paul Lynch. Four teenagers whose childhood prank accidentally caused the death of a young girl receive telephone calls on the anniversary of the incident warning them that someone knows what they did, and the subsequent prom becomes the site of a series of murders whose connection to the original accident the film reveals through a mystery structure considerably more formally invested than the slasher format's typical third-act revelation. Avco Embassy Pictures released Prom Night in 1980 with Jamie Lee Curtis and Leslie Nielsen in the lead roles. Nielsen's casting as the school principal providing the film with a mainstream comedic performer in a straight dramatic role that the production's tone required, and that his subsequent Naked Gun career has made retrospectively strange to process. Paul Lynch built the film around a pacing strategy that prioritized character investment over kill frequency, spending the first 45 minutes establishing the social dynamics of the prom's attendant community before the violence began in earnest, a decision that the slasher cycle's commercial accelerating conventions had not yet made standard practice. The disco sequence, in which Curtis dances an extended routine at the prom before the violence reaches her, was specifically noted by critics at the time as evidence Lynch had a formal sensibility more interested in atmosphere and character than in the genre's emerging kill-per-minute competitive dynamic. The gymnasium sequence in the film's climax, in which the killer's identity is finally confirmed through a confrontation that the film's mystery structure had been building toward across its entire runtime, was the content most consistently cited by audiences who encountered Prom Night through its wide theatrical release as the formal achievement that justified the film's extended investment in character development before arriving at its horror. Prom Night has been released through Scream Factory in a restoration. Paul Lynch made no further significant theatrical horror productions. Leslie Nielsen went on to the Naked Gun franchise. Jamie Lee Curtis received a Razzie nomination for the role, a critical determination that subsequent reassessment of the film has not supported. Night School 1981, directed by Ken Hughes. A series of decapitation murders targets young women enrolled in night school programs across Boston, and a police detective assigned to the case discovers a connection between the victims that leads toward a Boston University's anthropology department, and a professor whose fieldwork in primitive cultures has apparently brought something home with him that Boston's homicide division was not designed to address. Paramount Pictures released Night School through wide American theatrical distribution in 1981, positioning it within the slasher cycle's commercial expansion into urban settings, following the suburban and rural locations the genre's first wave had established as standard environments. Leonard Mann plays the detective with a procedural seriousness that the film uses to ground its more formally unusual horror elements in conventional thriller mechanics. His investigation providing the narrative backbone against which the decapitation sequences are staged with a practical effects precision that the production's Paramount budget had made technically ambitious rather than simply suggestive. Rachel Ward, in one of her earliest American film appearances, plays a key role in the investigation's development with a performance that the subsequent career she built in Australian and American cinema suggests was considerably more accomplished than the limited critical attention Night School received at the time of release acknowledged. The aquarium sequence in the film's second act, in which a victim's severed head is discovered in a restaurant fish tank by a diner who had simply ordered the soup, was the scene most cited by critics reviewing Night School's theatrical release as the specific formal achievement that distinguished the film from the more straightforward decapitation horror the genre had been producing. Not the violence itself, but the specific domestic, mundane environment in which its consequence was discovered. Night School has been released through Scream Factory in a restoration. Ken Hughes worked primarily in British cinema, both before and after this American production. Rachel Ward's subsequent career in films including the Thorn Birds television miniseries has generated retrospective interest in her earlier work. The Boston locations used throughout production have been identified by genre location historians. Silent Night, Deadly Night, 1984. Directed by Charles E. Sellier, Jr. A child witnesses his parents murdered by a man in a Santa Claus costume on Christmas Eve. Spends the following decade in a Catholic orphanage run by a mother superior whose disciplinary methods compound rather than address the original trauma, and is released into society at 18 with a specific psychological architecture that the first Santa costume he encounters as an adult activates with immediate and comprehensive consequences. TriStar Pictures released Silent Night, Deadly Night in November 1984 with a marketing campaign that placed imagery of a killer Santa Claus on billboards across American cities, imagery that the parent groups monitoring seasonal entertainment found sufficient grounds for organized protest before any of them had screened the actual film. Gene Siskel read the credits of the film on national television as a shaming exercise directed at the people responsible for its existence. A critical response so disproportionate to the film's actual content that TriStar pulled it from theatrical distribution within a week of opening, citing the controversy rather than any commercial failure. The film had actually performed respectably at the box office during its brief run. The specific cruelty of the orphanage sequences, depicting the Mother Superior's psychological conditioning of an already traumatized child, with a procedural attention to cause and effect that the film uses to make the subsequent violence feel inevitable rather than random, was the content most consistently overlooked by the protesters, whose attention remained fixed entirely on the Santa costume imagery. The antler sequence, a kill staged using Christmas decorative elements that the film's seasonal setting had made available, was the scene most cited by the American theatrical audience who encountered Silent Night, Deadly Night during its brief run as the formal achievement that separated it from the generic seasonal slasher marketing had suggested it was the specific cruelty of the staging reflecting the film's actual argument about conditioned psychology rather than simple shock content. Silent Night, Deadly Night has been released through Anchor Bay and subsequently Scream Factory in restorations. Charles Sellier made no further horror films. The controversy generated 4 sequels, none of which involved Sellier. Gene Siskel's on-air reading of the credits remains one of American film criticism's more formally unusual responses to a horror film. Hospital Massacre, 1982, directed by Boaz Davidson. A woman visits a Los Angeles hospital for routine test results and finds herself trapped inside the facility by a killer who has been waiting specifically for her since a childhood Valentine's Day incident in which she rejected his card and he responded by killing her brother. 20 years later, he has become a hospital employee specifically to be present when she eventually needed medical care, which is a level of logistical commitment to a grievance that the slasher format had not previously attempted to take seriously as a character motivation. Cannon Films released Hospital Massacre, also released as X-Ray, through regional theatrical distribution with Barbie Benton in the lead role. Her casting as a Playboy model, providing the film with a specific commercial profile that the hospital setting's medical examination sequences the killer arranged through forged test results could exploit with the genre's characteristic exploitation efficiency. Boaz Davidson, working within Cannon's prolific low-budget production infrastructure, staged the hospital sequences using actual medical facility locations whose genuine institutional architecture gave the violence a procedural authenticity that constructed sets could not have replicated on the same budget. The film's specific horror mechanism, legitimate medical authority weaponized by a killer with access to a patient's records and test results, gave the institutional setting a paranoid quality distinct from the more straightforwardly physical threat the slasher format typically deployed. The examination room sequence in the film's second act, in which the protagonist's medical vulnerability is exploited by the killer's institutional access with a sustained procedural patience that the genre's more physically direct violence rarely achieved, was the content most consistently discussed by genre audiences, encountering the film through its regional theatrical run and subsequent VHS distribution as the formal achievement that separated Hospital Massacre from the more generic hospital set horror the period produced. Hospital Massacre has been released through Scream Factory in a restoration. Boaz Davidson continued directing within Cannon's production infrastructure throughout the decade. Barbie Benton did not continue a significant film career following this production. The Los Angeles hospital locations used in filming have not been officially identified by the production. Fatal Games 1984, directed by Michael Elliott. 7 high school athletes training for the national championships begin dying one by one at the hands of a killer using a javelin as the primary weapon, and the film stages each kill within the actual athletic spaces of the training facility, the pool, the gymnasium, the track, with a specific procedural attention to how athletic environments create the isolation and vulnerability the slasher format required. Film Ventures International released Fatal Games through limited American theatrical and regional drive-in distribution in 1984, where its specific combination of athletic setting and javelin-based violence generated the kind of word-of-mouth reception among genre enthusiasts that the film's minimal marketing budget could not have produced independently. The athletic training facility setting gave the production a visual environment whose specific institutional spaces, locker rooms, training rooms, the pool after hours, provided the genre's required isolation within a setting the slasher cycle had not previously fully exploited. The competitive sports environment's hierarchies and schedules creating a natural structure for the killer's access to isolated victims that the film used with more formal intelligence than its limited commercial reception suggested. The cast of unknown performers playing the athlete characters gave the film a specific documentary authenticity that more recognizable casting would have undermined, the training sequences feeling genuinely athletic rather than performed. The pool sequence in the film's second act, in which a javelin is deployed in an aquatic environment whose specific physical constraints the killer uses, with a procedural understanding of athletic spaces that the film's institutional setting had established as plausible, was the sequence most cited by genre enthusiasts who discovered Fatal Games through VHS distribution as the formal achievement that justified the film's specific weapon choice beyond simple novelty. Fatal Games has been released through Vinegar Syndrome in a restoration. Michael Elliott made no further theatrical features. The athletic training facility where the film was shot has not been identified. The javelin as a slasher weapon has not been replicated in any subsequent production with comparable formal commitment. Cheerleader Camp 1988. Directed by John Quinn, a group of cheerleaders attending a regional competition camp begin dying during the competition week, and the film builds its mystery around a protagonist whose recurring nightmares suggest she may be responsible for the deaths, without any conscious awareness of her own actions. A psychological misdirection the film maintains with genuine formal commitment across its runtime before the third act's revelation undermines it in a way that genre audiences have argued about since the film's original release. Prism Entertainment released Cheerleader Camp directly to VHS in 1988, with Betsy Russell in the lead role and Leif Garrett as a supporting character. Garrett's former teen idol status, providing the production with a specific nostalgic commercial hook that the direct-to-video market of the late 1980s had identified as reliably effective, with the audience segment most likely to rent cheerleading-themed horror. John Quinn built the film around the actual cheerleading competition environment with a documentary attention to the specific rituals, hierarchies, and competitive dynamics of organized cheerleading that the horror premise used as both setting and social commentary. The competition's emphasis on physical perfection and performative enthusiasm, providing an environment whose specific pressures the film's psychological misdirection could exploit with formal intelligence. The dream sequence structure, in which the protagonist's nightmares increasingly blur with the film's actual violence, gave Cheerleader Camp a psychological ambiguity that the direct-to-video format rarely attempted with this degree of sustained formal commitment. The campfire sequence in the film's second act, in which the competition's social hierarchy becomes directly connected to the violence through the revelation of specific interpersonal histories among the camp's attendees, was the sequence most cited by the VHS rental audience as the moment Cheerleader Camp's formal ambitions became clear beneath the surface content the marketing had emphasized. Cheerleader Camp has been released through Vinegar Syndrome in a restoration. John Quinn made no further significant theatrical or direct-to-video features. Leif Garrett's appearance has generated retrospective discussion about the specific commercial logic of former teen idol casting in late 1980s direct-to-video horror. Betsy Russell continued working in genre film and television throughout the following decade. 7 film slashers simultaneously that genuinely accomplished productions disappeared beneath the volume of what was competing for the same shelf space. Silent Night, Deadly Night was pulled from theaters by protesters who hadn't seen it. Terror Train's killer moved through a masked party by stealing identities one by one. Hospital Massacre's killer waited 20 years in a specific job for one specific patient. Which setting disturbed you most tonight? Leave it in the comments. Like if any title was new. Subscribe, the archive keeps growing.